You're about to witness a moment that will give you chills. A single mother, just trying to make it through her day, is brutally attacked in broad daylight, until a fearless young woman steps in and turns the tide with one powerful kick. If you feel for this brave mother standing alone against violence, comment 1 below to show your support. Let's stand together for those who never give up, especially when no one else will. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more raw, powerful moments of real-life courage and justice. Her name was Rebecca Lane, a 42-year-old nurse assistant and single mother who was just trying to get home with a few groceries and her child's allergy medication. But instead of safety, she found herself face to face with violence. All it took was a look he didn't like. That was it. He was the fear of the neighborhood. Baggy jeans, black hoodie, and a stare so cold it could freeze bone. "That's what happens when you speak up, ma'am," he barked, his voice echoing off the graffiti-smeared brick walls of the strip mall alley. He stood a head taller than her, fists still clenched, chest rising and falling from the effort. "Any other Karens want to act cute today?" he added, glancing at the frozen onlookers near the back door of the Family Dollar. Rebecca lay curled on her side, clutching her arm, her face contorted in pain, her glasses knocked askew. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't insulted him. All she'd said was, "Please don't cut the line." That was all. One sentence, one simple plea for decency. And this was the cost. No one moved. A few people held phones, but they weren't calling the police. They were filming. Shoppers stood paralyzed behind parked cars, behind dumpsters, behind fear. No one intervened. No one spoke. Until she did. She had been walking past the row of stores after finishing her shift at the local youth center just down the street. Only 24 years old, Keisha Moore didn't look like a threat. Average height, slim build, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder, earbuds in, hoodie tied around her waist. Her hair was pulled up high, and her Converse sneakers squeaked on the pavement as she jogged across the parking lot. But what no one knew was that Keisha was a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo, a rising coach and former national youth champion, now teaching self-defense to underprivileged girls in her neighborhood. And what she saw in that moment, a grown man towering over an injured woman, inflated by power and daring anyone to challenge him, struck her like a blow to the chest. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just moved. By the time the man turned, she was already walking toward him, earbuds tucked into her pocket, eyes locked on his with a calm intensity. He stared, confused at first, then amused. "You serious?" he sneered, his lips curling into a smirk. "You think I won't knock you out too?" Keisha didn't blink. "I think you need to back away from her," she said. Heads turned. A woman whispered, "That girl's about to get herself hurt." But an older man in a worn Ford Braves cap watched closer, noticing the way Keisha's stance shifted, knees slightly bent, one foot angled just so. Subtle, controlled. He muttered, "That girl knows exactly what she's doing." The man stepped toward her, arms flexing, his voice arrogant and thick with disbelief. "You don't know what I'm capable of." "I've seen enough," Keisha replied, her voice soft, steady. "Leave." He laughed, loud and cruel, the sound empty and mean. "You gonna stop me? You think watching some kung fu movies makes you a fighter?" Keisha didn't respond. Instead, she calmly set her canvas bag down on the ground and rolled her neck once, never breaking eye contact. The parking lot had gone quiet. Even the phones lowered a little. This didn't look like a street scuffle. It felt like something else. The man lunged, throwing a heavy fist meant to intimidate. But Keisha wasn't there. She sidestepped easily, the punch missing her by inches. Before he could recover, she landed a quick front kick to his thigh, not enough to drop him, but enough to sting. He staggered slightly, caught off guard. His face darkened. "Oh, that's how it's gonna be?" He charged again, both fists swinging wildly. Keisha ducked the first punch, blocked the second with her forearm, then spun and drove her elbow into his ribs. It was fast, sharp, clean. He grunted and stepped back. "You little!" Keisha didn't wait. She stepped in, slammed her knee into his hip, then dropped low and swept his legs out from under him. He crashed onto the pavement, hard, the back of his head nearly hitting the ground. The crowd gasped. Phones came back up. Some people stepped closer. Rebecca, still on the ground, stared in awe at the young woman now standing between her and her attacker. Keisha didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on him. He scrambled to his feet, swinging wildly in frustration. But Keisha ducked under his arm and countered with a spinning back kick to his stomach. He dropped again, coughing. "Stay down," she said quietly. He didn't listen. He rose once more, his face twisted with rage. He lunged like a bull, trying to tackle her. Keisha planted her foot, pivoted, and with a smooth, powerful motion, threw him over her shoulder. His body hit the asphalt with a sickening slap. Limbs spread, breath knocked clean out of his lungs. This time, he didn't get up. Keisha stood firm, calm, breathing steady. No anger on her face, just focus. A moment passed, then another, and then applause. It started with one clap, then another. A woman shouted, "Yes, ma'am!" A man near the back entrance of the store yelled, "That's how you protect people!" Rebecca sat up slowly, wincing. Keisha turned and rushed to her, crouching to help her sit upright. "You're okay now," she whispered. "You're safe." Rebecca's voice trembled. "Who are you?" Keisha gave her a quiet smile. "Just someone who knows what it feels like to be left alone when you need help most." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Keisha stood tall as the man groaned behind her. The crowd didn't scatter. They stayed, they watched, they bore witness. And some of them, maybe for the first time, believed that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks quietly, with hands ready not to strike, but to defend. The sirens drew closer, the low wail rising through the warm Georgia air. But no one moved. The people who had gathered weren't done watching, and something in the stillness held them there, like they knew they had witnessed something rare, something just. The man on the ground groaned, rolling onto his side, his bravado now drained, reduced to shallow breathing and bleeding knuckles. Keisha stood over him, not out of pride, not for applause, but because her instincts demanded she make sure he stayed down. Her body still hummed with adrenaline, but her face was calm, composed. Rebecca leaned against the rear bumper of an old sedan, her breath steadier now. One of the bystanders, an older woman in a peach-colored church dress, crouched beside her, holding her hand gently. Keisha turned slightly and approached the two of them, crouching low, her voice quiet. "You okay?" Rebecca nodded slowly, brushing hair from her face. "I think so. My arm's sore, maybe sprained, but you saved my life." Keisha offered a modest shrug. "You shouldn't have had to need saving." Her voice carried no bitterness, only truth. Rebecca looked up at her. "You're so young. Where did you learn to fight like that?" Keisha smiled faintly. "Grew up in East Point. My mama worked doubles and Told me if I was going to be out after dark, I better know how to handle myself. I found a local dojang. First time I stepped on the mat, I knew I'd found something that made sense. I was 12. Been training ever since. Rebecca reached for her hand and squeezed it. God bless you, child. The police arrived with a burst of movement, lights flashing, doors swinging open. Officers quickly surrounded the scene, one of them kneeling to check on the man on the ground, another helping Rebecca into a seated position on the trunk of the car. An EMT unit pulled in moments later, paramedics emerging with quiet efficiency. One of them glanced at Keisha, then at the man on the ground. He's the assailant? Keisha nodded. He assaulted her. I intervened to stop it. He resisted. I restrained him. The paramedic blinked at her choice of words. Restrained, huh? She looked barely 5 feet 5 inches. You military? Keisha chuckled softly. No, sir. Taekwondo, the officer standing nearby, raised an eyebrow. You took him down? More than once, a voice said from the crowd. It was the old man in the Braves cap, now stepping forward. She handled him like he was a paper bag. Another chimed in. She saved that woman. Nobody else even moved. The officers took statements as the medics checked over both Rebecca and the attacker. When they tried to sit the man up, he moaned and collapsed back. His bravado had dissolved into whimpers. One of the officers turned to Keisha. You're not under arrest, ma'am. You're a witness and a hero. That said, you might want to stick around in case we need a full report. Keisha nodded. No problem. The man was loaded onto a stretcher, handcuffed, his head lolling to the side as the gurney wheels clattered over broken pavement. Rebecca was lifted gently into the back of the ambulance, a brace now strapped to her wrist. As she was secured, she looked back at Keisha. I'd like to see you again. Please. I want to thank you properly. Keisha hesitated, then pulled a pen from her bag and scribbled her number on a pharmacy receipt. Any time, she said, handing it over. You don't owe me anything. Just heal up. The rest of the day passed in a blur. After the police left, the crowd dispersed slowly, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others calling loved ones to recount the scene. Keisha retrieved her duffel, slung it over her shoulder, and started walking down the street toward the bus stop. Her body ached. Her wrist had taken a knock, and there was a dull bruise forming under her left ribs. But she wasn't thinking about that. She was thinking about how fast everything had changed. One moment, she was walking home, with nothing on her mind, but leftover tacos and grating sparring footage. The next, she was stepping into a situation that could have ended so differently. Later that evening, back in her small one-bedroom apartment off Roosevelt Highway, Keisha sat with her laptop open, scrolling through the messages flooding in. One of the teens from her self-defense class had filmed part of the fight and posted it to Instagram. The video was going viral. Hundreds of comments. Shares climbing by the minute. She wasn't used to attention. Her classes were mostly word of mouth, and her students came from tough homes, kids who couldn't afford traditional martial arts schools. She ran everything on donations, leftover grant money, and the occasional fundraiser car wash. But now, her name was spreading, and with it, something else. Hope. She clicked on a new message. A woman from Savannah. I showed your video to my daughter. She said she wants to learn how to fight like you. Thank you for inspiring her. Another message, this time from a gym owner in Charlotte. If you're ever up this way, we'd love to have you teach a seminar. Keisha sat back, rubbing her eyes. It was a lot. A good kind of overwhelming, but overwhelming all the same. She closed the laptop and leaned back into the couch, the fabric cool against her skin. She wasn't in it for the praise. But maybe, just maybe, something good could come out of it. The next day, she returned to the youth center as usual, greeted by a group of young girls who'd seen the video. One of them, a shy 12-year-old named Zariah, ran up and hugged her tight. "Miss Keisha," she said, "you're a real-life superhero." Keisha knelt down, holding her by the shoulders. "No, baby, I'm just someone who didn't let fear make the decision." Zariah nodded solemnly. "I want to be like you." Keisha smiled. "You already are. You showed up. That's the first step." That afternoon, she added an extra hour to class, teaching new combinations, talking through breathing techniques, how to read body language. She told them about the fight, how she'd used the man's strength against him, how staying calm made all the difference. She didn't glamorize it. She talked about fear, about risk, about responsibility. And every girl in that room listened, not like they were watching a fight scene, but like they were learning how to take their first steps into a world that might one day try to silence them. Later that week, Rebecca called. Her voice was stronger, steadier. "I wanted you to know I filed charges. They told me he had a record, assault, intimidation. I'm not staying silent, not anymore." Keisha was quiet a moment, then said, "Good. That's strength, too." The days passed, but the memory didn't fade. Keisha's name made local news. The video kept circulating. But what mattered most to her weren't the headlines or the online views. It was the quiet knock on her class door 2 weeks later. A father stood there, hand resting gently on the shoulder of his daughter. "She saw what you did," he said. "She told me she wants to learn how to protect herself. And her mom. I was hesitant at first, but I watched the video too." Keisha smiled, nodded, and welcomed them in. Justice doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it comes in a parking lot, in the form of a young woman who didn't look like much, until she stood between someone vulnerable and someone cruel. And once you see that kind of strength, you don't forget it. You don't look at people the same way. You don't walk by as quickly. Because somewhere in the heart of Georgia, a nurse was saved, a thug was stopped, and a teacher gave a lesson that echoed far beyond the mat. 2 weeks later, a spring rain washed over South Fulton, leaving the streets slick with puddles and reflections of neon signs blinking through the dusk. At the corner of Old National Highway and Creel Road, the modest storefront of Keisha's community dojo glowed warm against the gray evening. Inside, the mats were worn, the mirrors slightly cracked along the edges, but the spirit of the place was unshaken. Kids lined up along the mirrored wall, some barefoot and bouncing with nervous energy. Others, more serious, focused, their belts tied tightly around their waists. Keisha stood in the center of the room, arms crossed, her voice calm but commanding as she walked them through forms and techniques. She corrected a stance here, adjusted a guard there, and every so often, a smile broke through the determined mask she wore. It was this space, this small corner of hope, that grounded her when the world outside grew too loud. The video had passed 1 million views days ago. National outlets were now picking it up. "Young woman stops violent attack in Georgia with martial arts precision," one headline read. Some were calling her the quiet storm of South Fulton. Others just referred to her as that girl with the kicks. She didn't care much for the names. Her students called her Miss Keisha, and that was enough. But with attention came consequences. One afternoon, a local reporter showed up uninvited. Then another. People asked for interviews. Offers came from corporate self-defense companies. One even suggested she partner with them to promote a line of branded gear. She declined. She didn't want to be famous. She just wanted more girls to walk home safe. And then there were the other messages, the darker ones. Angry rants in her inbox. Anonymous voices calling her a thug, accusing her of embarrassing a black man in front of white folks, as if defending a woman from violence required permission. She read them all once, then deleted them. That kind of anger didn't scare her. She'd seen worse. She'd grown up in it. She knew that standing between a fist and a face always came with a price. And she was still willing to pay it. Rebecca and Keisha had kept in touch. They met twice, once for coffee, once when Keisha visited her at home, bringing over a care package and some bandages from the clinic she volunteered at. Rebecca's bruises were healing, her arm now in a soft brace instead of a sling. But what changed more than anything was the way she spoke. No longer timid, no more whispered apologies. She carried herself straighter, with a certain steadiness in her voice, like something deep inside had been restored. That night, as they sat on Rebecca's porch drinking iced tea from red plastic cups, Rebecca said something that stuck with Keisha for days afterward. "When he hit me," she said, "I didn't just feel pain. I felt erased, like everything I was. A mother, a nurse, a person, meant nothing. But when you stepped in, you didn't just stop him. You gave it all back to me. My dignity, my place. I'll never forget that." Keisha had nodded quietly, not because she had the words to respond, but because she understood. She'd felt that way once too, back when she was 15, cornered in an alley by a boy from school who thought no one would care what happened to her. She never talked about it. She didn't need to. But it was why she trained, why she taught, why she didn't flinch when fists started flying. Because someone had to make sure the next girl didn't have to live in silence. 3 weeks after the incident, Keisha got a call from a local high school. A guidance counselor had seen the video and wanted to invite her to speak to a group of students during their Women's History Month program. Keisha hesitated. Public speaking wasn't her thing, but the counselor said something that made her pause. "You don't have to be a polished speaker. Just be who you were in that parking lot. They'll listen." So Keisha agreed. The gymnasium was packed. Rows of folding chairs, restless teenagers, and a few skeptical teachers leaning against the walls. Keisha stepped up to the mic, palms sweating slightly, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She wore simple jeans and a black t-shirt, with her dojo's logo printed in white over her chest. No uniform, no belt, just her. She told them about fear, about how it doesn't always look like screaming or running. Sometimes it looks like standing still when you should move. She talked about training, not just the kicks and punches, but the discipline, the control. "It's not about fighting," she told them. "It's about knowing you could and choosing when you must." At the end, a girl with braids and wide eyes raised her hand. "Miss Keisha, what if you're scared and can't do anything?" Keisha looked at her and said, "Then you speak. Then you ask for help. And if no one hears you, you speak louder. Until someone does." The crowd clapped. Not wild, not forced, just real. And Keisha smiled as she stepped off the stage, knowing this was where the real fight lived. Quietly, in hearts learning they were worth defending. That night, as she walked home under a soft drizzle, Keisha passed by the alley where it had all started. The Dollar Value parking lot was nearly empty, the lights buzzing, the same dented dumpster leaning against the wall. A new security camera had been installed. A fresh coat of paint tried to cover the graffiti. But the real change wasn't in the walls. It was in the air. She paused, letting the rain tap against her hoodie, her eyes drifting across the place where Rebecca had fallen. Then she turned and walked on. Back in her apartment, she found a package waiting by her door. No label. Inside was a new pair of sparring gloves, black with silver trim, and a note. For the fights you haven't fought yet. An old student. Keisha held them in her hands for a moment, then set them gently beside her shoes. Tomorrow was another day, another lesson, another chance to remind the world what strength really looked like. And somewhere across the city, another girl stood a little taller. Another woman spoke a little louder. Another person who had once been afraid remembered that they weren't alone anymore. Because Keisha Moore had stood her ground, not for applause, not for fame, but because someone had to. And that someone, it turned out, could look just like her. Young, black, quiet, ready.